The ground shook with every impact against the steel-reinforced barricade. The moans of the undead merged into an unrelenting roar, a sound that had haunted the last remnants of humanity for years. Sentinel Bastion, the final known human stronghold, stood tall against the tide, but for how much longer? Commander Elias Vance surveyed the wall from the northern watchtower, his scarred hands gripping the railing. Below, the walking corpses pressed against the barricades in overwhelming numbers, their grotesque forms writhing and clawing, a sea of death stretching beyond the horizon. The floodlights illuminated the horror, revealing decomposed faces twisted in hunger, their soulless eyes locked onto the living. "Commander," a voice crackled through his radio. The eastern barricade took a heavy hit. "We lost the second layer of defense." Elias swore under his breath. "Hold the line, damn it. We can't afford another breach." He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Dana Riggs, who stood beside him, her face grim. "We need more men on the east side." "We don't have more men," Dana replied. "We're running low on ammo, food, and energy. The backup generators are barely holding, and morale is breaking. We can't keep this up." Elias knew she was right. It had been 6 years since the outbreak. Most of humanity had been wiped out, and those who remained were either here in the stronghold or dead men walking beyond the walls. Sentinel Bastion was the last light in a world consumed by darkness. A sudden explosion rocked the eastern wall. Elias's heart pounded as he grabbed his binoculars. Flames erupted where the barricade had partially collapsed. Figures, both living and dead, moved chaotically in the smoke. "Shit! They broke through!" Dana yelled. Elias grabbed the radio. "Fire teams, suppress that breach. I need gunners on the rooftops now." Machine guns roared to life, raining bullets into the wave of undead pouring through the wreckage. The high-pitched screeches of zombies being torn apart filled the night, but for every one they gunned down, 10 more pressed forward. Then, he saw something that sent a chill through his veins. A group of zombies, faster than the others, leaped over the wreckage, dodging gunfire with unnatural reflexes. "Did you see that?" Dana asked, eyes wide. "I saw," Elias muttered. "That's not normal." The Horde was changing. Adapting. He pushed the thought aside. Right now, survival was the only priority. Get a demolition team down there. Seal that breach before we're overrun. On it. Dana sprinted toward the command center. Elias grabbed his rifle and made his way down to the battlefield. The moment he reached the ground level, he was in the thick of it. Soldiers fought desperately, hacking and shooting at the creatures closing in. A young private screamed as a zombie lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Before the thing could sink its teeth into his throat, Elias put a bullet through its skull. He yanked the soldier to his feet. "Get up. We're not dead yet." The demolition team arrived, hauling explosives. Under heavy fire, they set charges along the breach, barely dodging the undead snapping at their heels. "Fire in the hole," someone shouted. The blast sent rotting limbs flying as the barricade was sealed in a fiery explosion. The immediate threat was contained, for now. As the dust settled, Elias turned to his men. Their faces were exhausted, hollow, their eyes holding the weight of too many battles. He could feel it. This wasn't just another night. The stronghold was reaching its breaking point. And something out there, beyond the walls, was waiting for them to fail. The smell of smoke and gunpowder lingered in the air as the survivors regrouped. The breach had been sealed, but it came at a cost, dozens of fighters dead, even more wounded. Elias Vance stood amidst the rubble, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his mind racing. The wall had held for now, but the undead were adapting, becoming more dangerous. And worse, something was off. Dana Riggs approached, wiping sweat and grime from her face. "That breach wasn't natural," she said, her voice low. "I checked the blast radius. Those explosives weren't set off by an external force." Elias's gut twisted. "You're saying sabotage?" Dana's eyes were hard. Someone inside set those charges. Betrayal. It wasn't the first time a desperate survivor had lost their mind, but this was different. Someone wanted the stronghold to fall. Elias clenched his jaw. We need to lock this place down. No one gets in or out without clearance. Full inspection of all personnel and equipment. Dana nodded. Already on it. But if there's a traitor, they won't go down without a fight. A sudden commotion erupted from the western gate. Soldiers shouted as a figure stumbled toward them, covered in blood and dirt. Hold your fire, one of the guards barked. Elias rushed over as they dragged the newcomer inside. His uniform was tattered, his face gaunt from starvation. One of the missing scouts. Where's the rest of your team? Elias asked, his voice tense. The scout coughed violently, barely able to stand. Dead, he gasped. They're dead. Elias's stomach dropped. What happened? The scout grabbed his arm with surprising strength. It's not just the Horde. There's something leading them. Something intelligent. A chill ran through Elias. What do you mean? The scout's eyes darted around wildly, as if afraid to say too much. They weren't just wandering. They were organized. Moving in packs. Trapping us. His breathing grew ragged. And there was one, bigger, smarter. It watched us. It let me go. It wanted me to come back. A cold dread settled over the group. If what the scout was saying was true, they weren't just fighting mindless monsters anymore. Elias turned to Dana. Get him to the med bay. I want every detail he can give us. As they carried the scout away, a sharp whistle rang out over the stronghold. A signal for all personnel to gather. The inspections were beginning. The soldiers lined up in the central square, their weapons slung at their sides. Elias paced in front of them, his voice steady but firm. Someone in this stronghold is working against us. The breach wasn't an accident. Until we find out who, no one leaves without my say-so. Understood? A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but tension hung thick in the air. The inspections began. Weapons checked, gear searched. It was slow, tedious work. Hours passed with no sign of the saboteur. Then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sharp cry echoed from the barracks. Elias and Dana rushed toward the sound, weapons drawn. Inside, a soldier lay sprawled on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. His throat was slit, his radio still crackling. Dana knelt beside the body. He was on patrol duty. Whoever did this didn't want him talking. Elias cursed under his breath. The traitor was still among them, and now they were killing to cover their tracks. Lock down the barracks, he ordered. Nobody leaves until we find them. As the soldiers scrambled to obey, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Outside, beyond the walls, the undead gathered in greater numbers than ever before. And somewhere in that endless horde, something was watching. Waiting. The Stronghold's final battle had already begun. The Stronghold was on edge. After the murder of the patrol soldier, tensions ran high, and trust among the survivors was unraveling fast. Elias Vance stood in the command center, staring at a map of Sentinel Bastion. The walls had held, but the enemy wasn't just at their gates, it was inside. Dana Riggs entered, her face grim. The scout's dead. Elias turned sharply. What? She nodded. Someone smothered him in the med bay. Didn't even give him a chance to talk. Elias slammed his fist against the table. The only man who had seen what was out there was gone. Who was guarding him? Corporal Fisher, Dana said. She swears she didn't see anyone enter, but someone got past her. The traitor was still at work. The stronghold was being weakened from the inside, just as the undead outside were growing stronger. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. A radio operator stepped in, looking shaken. Sir, you need to hear this. The operator led them to the radio station, where the static-filled transmission from a recon team buzzed through the speakers. The signal was weak, barely holding. Repeat, overwhelming numbers, but it's different, not random. Elias leaned forward. Who is this? Identify yourself. A heavy pause. Then, a weak voice, Sergeant Wallace, we're surrounded, but they aren't attacking. Elias frowned. What do you mean? The radio crackled again. They're waiting. Watching us. And there's one, it's leading them. Elias exchanged a look with Dana. The scout had said the same thing before he died. Wallace's voice came again, hoarse and terrified. It's not like the others, it thinks. A sudden, guttural snarl cut through the transmission, followed by panicked gunfire and screaming. Then, silence. The signal went dead. Elias clenched his jaw. Damn it. Dana exhaled sharply. That's the second recon team wiped out. They're not just wandering anymore, Elias. They're hunting us. A soldier ran into the room, panting. Sir. You need to see this, now. Elias and Dana followed him to the western wall. Soldiers were gathered, staring in horror beyond the barricades. The Horde had changed. The mindless masses were still there, clawing at the walls, but behind them stood something different. A towering figure, nearly 8 feet tall, its decayed flesh stretched over a grotesquely muscled frame. Its skull-like face was partially intact, but its hollow eye sockets held something the undead never had before. Awareness. And it wasn't alone. Smaller but still unnatural creatures flanked it, zombies that moved with unnatural speed, their heads twitching, as if listening for orders. The massive zombie slowly raised one rotting arm and pointed directly at the stronghold. The Horde roared in unison. Elias felt a cold dread settle into his bones. It's controlling them. Dana swallowed. If they're thinking now, we're screwed. The intelligent zombie didn't move, didn't charge. It just stood there. Waiting. Elias turned to his men. Double the guards. Every entrance, every weak spot. We don't know what they're planning, but I promise you this, whatever's coming, we'll be ready. As the soldiers scrambled to reinforce the stronghold, Elias looked back at the undead commander beyond the walls. For the first time since the apocalypse began, it wasn't just survival at stake. It was war. Sentinel Bastion braced for the inevitable. The undead horde stood just beyond the walls, an army of rotting flesh held back only by steel and gunfire. But this was different. The undead weren't attacking in their usual chaotic frenzy. They were waiting. Watching. And the massive one, the intelligent one, stood at the front, its empty eye sockets fixed on the stronghold. Commander Elias Vance clenched his jaw. If the enemy was planning something, so were they. Inside the war room, Elias, Dana Riggs, and the remaining officers studied the map of their defenses. The power grid was failing, ammunition was running low, and morale was hanging by a thread. But the biggest problem? The traitor was still inside. Whoever sabotaged the barricades and killed the scout is still moving freely, Dana said. If we don't root them out now, they'll strike again. Elias nodded. Agreed. But we can't focus on that alone. We need a plan to deal with that thing out there. He jabbed a finger at a grainy recon photo of the intelligent zombie. Sergeant Holt, a grizzled veteran, leaned over the table. We've fought shamblers, sprinters, and even those freakish crawlers, but we've never seen anything like this. It's organizing them. Elias exhaled sharply. That's why we take it out. Cut off the head of the snake. Dana frowned. And how do we do that? We don't have enough firepower to break through the horde and reach it. We don't have to, Elias said. We bring it to us. The room fell silent. Elias continued. We know it's watching us. It's studying our defenses. If it's truly intelligent, it'll recognize when an opportunity presents itself. Holt narrowed his eyes. You're talking about a trap. Elias nodded. We'll fake a power failure. Make it look like our defenses are weaker than they are. If it takes the bait and leads the Horde in, we unleash everything we've got. Dana crossed her arms. That's a hell of a gamble. Elias looked around the room. Everything we've done so far has been a gamble. We either take control of this fight, or we wait here to die. No one argued. Within hours, the plan was set. The engineers simulated a cascading power failure, making it seem like the defenses on the eastern wall were shutting down. Spotlights flickered, and automated gun turrets powered off. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. The soldiers took their positions, hiding within the Stronghold's reinforced structures, weapons at the ready. The streets were eerily silent, the illusion of weakness carefully crafted. Now, they waited. Elias stood atop the command tower, rifle in hand, watching through his scope. The massive zombie remained still, its head slightly tilted, as if considering. Then, slowly, it turned toward the Horde and let out a deep, guttural snarl. The undead shifted in response. Then, they charged. Hundreds of corpses surged toward the eastern wall, their rotting bodies crashing against the barricades. The intelligent one led them forward, its strides unervingly deliberate. Elias took a deep breath. Wait for it. The Horde slammed against the weakened defenses, pushing through the damaged section. Wait. The massive zombie stepped inside the perimeter, its dead eyes scanning the area. Now. Gunfire erupted from the hidden firing positions. Explosives detonated, tearing the first wave of undead apart. High-powered rounds hammered into the intelligent zombie, but it barely flinched. It let out an ear-piercing shriek. The Horde didn't scatter. They fought harder. The monster turned its head toward the command tower, toward Elias. It knew. With unnatural speed, it leaped, claws outstretched. Elias dove for cover as the creature slammed into the tower, shaking the structure. Bullets tore into its flesh, but it kept coming. Through the chaos, Elias realized one terrifying truth. The trap hadn't worked. It had been one step ahead of them all along. And now, it was inside their walls. The walls of Sentinel Bastion trembled as the intelligent zombie tore through the command tower's outer defenses. The gunfire from the soldiers barely slowed it down. Its grotesquely muscled frame absorbed bullets like a sponge, and even the high-caliber rounds only staggered it. From his position inside the tower, Elias Vance could hear the steel reinforcements groaning under the monster's relentless assault. Dust and debris rained down as it slammed its massive fists against the walls, each impact shaking the entire structure. Dana Riggs' voice crackled through his earpiece. Elias, get the hell out of there. That thing's going to tear the tower apart. Elias steadied his rifle. Not yet. We need to slow it down before it reaches the inner compound. From below, the sounds of the undead breaking through the eastern defenses echoed through the stronghold. The Horde was inside. The trap had failed, and now Sentinel Bastion was on the verge of collapse. Elias aimed through his scope, locking onto the creature's deformed skull. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dead center, causing the monster's head to jerk back slightly, but then, to his horror, it turned and grinned. A grin. A grotesque, twisted mimicry of a human expression. Elias barely had time to react before the creature leaped. The entire front of the tower exploded inward as the monster smashed through, sending Elias flying backward. He crashed against a steel beam, pain lancing through his ribs. His rifle skidded away. The intelligent zombie stalked toward him, its hollow eyes locked onto his. For the first time, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure, unfiltered fear. The creature spoke. Not in words, but in a guttural, distorted growl that almost sounded like a whisper in his mind. You fight, but you lose. Elias gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand. Go to hell. The creature lunged. At the last second, Elias rolled aside, grabbing a combat knife from his belt. With every ounce of strength he had left, he drove it deep into the creature's side. It let out a deafening snarl and swung a massive arm, sending Elias crashing through a glass panel and plummeting down 2 stories. Pain erupted through his body as he landed in a heap of shattered debris. His vision blurred. Above him, the monster peered down, watching. Then, strangely, it turned away. It wasn't here for him. It had another target. Dana's voice crackled in his earpiece again. Elias. The thing, it's heading for the control center. If it reaches the main power grid, it can shut down everything. Elias forced himself up, his body screaming in protest. Not happening. The stronghold was falling apart around him. The streets were overrun with the undead, soldiers fighting desperately to hold the line. Through the chaos, Elias saw him. The traitor. A soldier, someone from their own ranks, was sprinting toward the control center, moving with purpose. Elias's mind raced. This wasn't just sabotage. This was coordinated. The monster wasn't working alone. Elias pushed forward, ignoring the pain, grabbing a discarded shotgun from a fallen soldier. He sprinted toward the control center, weaving through the carnage, blasting any undead that got too close. Ahead, the traitor reached the control doors, typing in an override code. "Stop him!" Elias roared. Dana and a squad of soldiers emerged from the side streets, opening fire. The traitor turned just in time to take a bullet to the leg, collapsing with a scream. Elias didn't slow down. He slammed into the control center, pumping his shotgun. The monster was already there, clawing at the reinforced blast doors. If it got through. Elias raised his weapon. "Hey, ugly!" The creature turned. Elias fired. The first shot blew out its knee, forcing it down. The second took half its jaw. But the monster still moved, dragging itself forward. Dana rushed in, tossing a grenade. "Move!" Elias dove aside as the explosion engulfed the creature in fire and smoke. The blast sent a shockwave through the control center, flames licking at the walls. For a moment, silence. Then, a deep, inhuman growl from within the flames. It wasn't dead. Not yet. And the stronghold was out of time. The explosion should have killed it. Elias Vance and Dana Riggs watched in grim silence as the control center burned, thick smoke pouring into the night sky. The stronghold's defenses had failed. The eastern barricades were gone, overrun by the relentless dead. Screams and gunfire echoed through Sentinel Bastion. And in the heart of the inferno, the monster still moved. A massive, charred silhouette rose from the flames. Its flesh was blackened and peeling, the lower half of its face barely holding together. One of its arms hung uselessly at its side, but it didn't care. It would not die. Dana took a shaky step back. "Elias, tell me you have another plan." Elias didn't answer. His mind was racing. There was no plan anymore. Everything had fallen apart. A ragged cough snapped him out of it. The traitor. The wounded soldier, Corporal Grayson, was slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding leg. His face was contorted with pain and something else, defiance. Elias marched toward him, yanking him up by his collar. "Tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet in your head right now." Grayson chuckled weakly. "Because you're already dead, Commander." Elias pressed the barrel of his shotgun to the man's skull. "Who are you working for?" "Why?" The traitor spat blood, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't see it yet, do you? The world doesn't belong to us anymore." Dana grabbed Elias's arm. "We don't have time for this. We have to fall back." The monster roared. In a blur of motion, it charged through the flames, heading straight for them. "Move!" Elias shouted. They dove aside as the creature smashed into the control center wall, tearing through metal like paper. Sparks erupted as the main power conduits ruptured, and suddenly, the stronghold went dark. The remaining automated turrets powered down. The emergency floodlights flickered and died. The last barrier protecting Sentinel Bastion was gone. The undead poured in. The streets became a nightmare of chaos and death. Soldiers screamed as the Horde crashed into them. The defenses that had held for months collapsed in minutes. Elias grabbed Dana, dragging her behind a wrecked vehicle as bullets and claws tore through the air. "We have to get to the central bunker. We can still regroup." Dana looked around, her expression raw with disbelief. "There's nothing left to regroup, Elias." She wasn't wrong. The Bastion, humanity's last stronghold, was falling. The monster stalked toward them, dragging its ruined body forward, unfazed by the destruction around it. It wasn't mindless. It had known exactly what to do: disable the power, let the Horde in, and ensure that no one escaped. Grayson coughed again, laughing bitterly. "You were never going to win." Elias turned back to him. "Tell me one good reason I shouldn't finish you off." Grayson's bloody smile widened. "Because I know the truth." Elias hesitated. Grayson's voice was weak, but insistent. "The creature, it's not the only one. There are more. Many more. And they're evolving." Dana's face paled. "Evolving? They don't just turn people anymore," Grayson whispered. "They're changing them." Elias tightened his grip on his shotgun. "What the hell does that mean?" Before Grayson could answer, the monster lunged. Elias barely managed to shove Dana out of the way before the massive creature's claws slashed downward, embedding into the concrete where they had just been standing. The traitor wasn't as lucky. Grayson let out a strangled cry as the monster's clawed hand closed around his head. Elias and Dana watched in horror as the creature didn't kill him, not immediately. Instead, it brought him close, as if studying him. And then, Grayson stopped screaming. His body convulsed violently, his eyes rolling back as something dark and unnatural spread through his veins. His skin twisted and pulsed, veins turning black. The monster wasn't killing him. It was changing him. "Oh my God," Dana whispered. Elias grabbed her wrist. "Run!" They bolted through the chaos, weaving between the dead as the stronghold collapsed around them. The last stronghold of humanity was no longer a refuge. It was a graveyard. And the monsters weren't just the undead anymore. They were something worse. Something new. The last stronghold of humanity was gone. Elias and Dana sprinted through the burning ruins of Sentinel Bastion, the screams of the dying echoing all around them. The undead were everywhere, flooding the streets, tearing through the remaining survivors. But the worst wasn't the Horde. It was what was happening to Grayson. The traitor, if he could even be called that anymore, was still alive. His body writhed on the ground as black veins twisted beneath his skin. His mouth opened in a silent scream, his eyes rolling back before snapping forward, pitch black, hollow. The intelligent zombie watched, motionless, as if waiting. And then, Grayson stood up. Dana gasped. "No, that's not possible." Elias didn't waste time being shocked. He raised his shotgun and fired. The blast hit Grayson square in the chest. He staggered, but he didn't fall. Instead, he laughed. The voice was wrong, distorted, as if something else was speaking through him. "You don't understand, Commander," Grayson rasped, his lips curling into a sick grin. "We aren't just the dead anymore. We're the next step." Elias pumped the shotgun again. "Like hell you are." Before he could fire, Grayson moved, too fast. He was a blur, 1 second standing still, the next lunging at them. Elias barely dodged as Grayson's clawed hands tore into the air where he had just been. He's fast," Dana cried. Elias didn't need to be told twice. They weren't dealing with mindless zombies anymore. They were dealing with something else. The monster that had turned Grayson hadn't created another mindless corpse. It had made something like itself. And it wasn't just Grayson. Across the battlefield, other bodies were changing. The dead weren't just shambling anymore. Some of them were growing stronger, faster, smarter. The infection wasn't just spreading. It was evolving. "We have to get to the tunnels," Elias shouted, grabbing Dana's arm. It's our only chance. The underground escape tunnels had been built for a worst-case scenario. That scenario had come. They sprinted toward the old maintenance entrance, dodging through wreckage and bodies. The Horde was everywhere, but the real threat was the new ones, the ones that watched. Grayson chased them, moving in unnatural bursts of speed, his limbs twisting like something was still figuring out how to use them. We're not gonna make it. Dana gasped. Elias spotted a half-destroyed guard post near the tunnel entrance. A fuel tank. A trap. Keep running, he ordered. Dana didn't argue. Elias turned, leveling his shotgun at the fuel tank just as Grayson lunged. Boom! The explosion tore through the street, fire consuming everything in its path. The shockwave sent Elias tumbling backward. Grayson was gone. Or so he hoped. Dana dragged him up. We have to go, now. They reached the tunnel entrance, Elias slamming the emergency lock just as more of the evolved undead started noticing them. The heavy steel doors slid shut. Darkness swallowed them. Silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. They were alive. Barely. Dana exhaled shakily. We lost, didn't we? Elias didn't answer immediately. He turned, looking down the long, pitch-black tunnel. Somewhere, far ahead, was the outside world. Not a safe world. Not a human world. But a world that was still out there. No, he said finally. As long as we're breathing, we haven't lost. Dana gave a weak chuckle. That's a nice thought. But where do we go now? Elias checked his remaining ammo, gripping his weapon tightly. Wherever there's a fight. Together, they stepped forward into the darkness, toward whatever remained of humanity's last hope. And behind them, in the ruins of Sentinel Bastion, the new dead watched. Waiting. Learning. Evolving.